Welcome. Let's dive into the essentials of hazardous waste management, brought to you by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. The Hazardous Waste Program of the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality prepared the RCRA Basics training. DEQ, nor any person acting on its behalf, make any warranty or representation, expressed or implied, with respect to the use of any information contained in this training, or assume any liabilities with respect to the use of or for damages resulting from the use of any information, apparatus, method, or process discussed in this training. The material offered in this training is not intended to recommend any particular waste reduction technique or method. Rather, DEQ offers this training for educational and informational purposes. When using this training and making any decisions concerning waste management, including waste reduction, ensure appropriately trained professionals and consultants review the facts and circumstances. It is the generator's responsibility to comply with federal and state rules and regulations. This training is a resource but does not replace the laws or rules, nor does compliance with this training ensure regulatory compliance according to the law. To ensure compliance, check the applicable state or federal rules and regulations. If further assistance is required, contact DEQ or another qualified professional. This material is a public domain document. As such, it may not be copyrighted in any form. This material may be reproduced for educational purposes so long as this notice is included. In today's training, we have two main topics on the agenda. First up, we'll walk through the process of making a hazardous waste determination. Then, we'll tackle the ins and outs of counting wastes and understanding key requirements for hazardous waste generators. Quick heads up, while this training is super valuable, it doesn't cover all the RCRA training requirements. Each facility needs to ensure their training meets the specific RCRA job duties assigned to each employee. For instance, if your employee Pat is the go-to person for on-site emergencies and spills, Pat's training should include the spill plan, using PPE, handling spill equipment, and more. Make sure you're meeting and documenting all those RCRA training needs. Now let's dive into RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. It's the law that covers hazardous and solid waste management. Back in 1976, RCRA came onto the scene, introducing the concept of cradle-to-grave responsibility for waste. But what does that mean? It means once it's your waste, it's always your waste. RCRA has evolved since 1976, with a major upgrade in 1984 to close some loopholes and include more waste generators. Updates keep rolling in, and as of 2023, DEQ has embraced changes like the Generator Improvement Rule, the Pharmaceutical Rule, and parts of the Definition of Solid Waste Rule to stay in sync with the federal standards. But RCRA isn't just about managing waste, it also lays down the laws for landfills and recycling facilities. Its big goal? To reduce waste generation, especially the hazardous kind, conserve energy and resources through recycling, and make sure waste management protects human health and the environment. Before RCRA, just about any hole in the ground could be treated as a giant garbage bin or hazardous waste dump. It was a bit of a mess. Recycling wasn't really a thing. RCRA changed the game, with tighter regulations for landfills and waste management. Now let's take a tour through the Chemical Waste Management Hazardous Waste Landfill in Arlington, Oregon, just about 150 miles east of Portland. Ever heard of leachate? It's the liquid runoff from landfills, courtesy of rain seeping through or waste decomposing. These pipes shown here are for collecting that liquid, so it can be managed properly. Check out these landfill liners, a mix of clay, compacted earth, and heavy-duty plastic tarp-like sheets. These different layers help guide the leachate where it needs to go. This landfill is unique because it uses 3 liners instead of 2 like many other landfills. Some waste is so problematic that it must be sealed inside the landfill. That concrete space you see? It's like a vault, ready to house some seriously hazardous waste. These drums and boxes full of hazardous waste are lined up and ready to take a permanent nap underground. If you send hazardous waste to Chem Waste Management here in Oregon, your drums could look like this. And here's another peek at those liners. These cover the waste above and below. It's like giving the waste a snug, leak-reducing hug. That was a quick tour of Oregon's largest hazardous waste landfill. There's a whole lot you didn't see, including the pre-screening process up front to make sure the landfill can handle the waste, groundwater monitoring wells, land disposal treatment standards, and much, much more ensure this landfill is managed properly. When managing or handling hazardous waste, keeping you and your team safe needs to be your top priority. You'll learn a lot today about managing hazardous waste, but don't stop here. Become the safety champion and get trained in OSHA, DOT, and all the other safety requirements. Now here's a question. What's the best way to manage hazardous waste? It's simple. Don't produce it in the first place. Cutting down on hazardous waste isn't just good for your team's safety, it's also good business. Reducing hazardous waste saves money on waste management and disposal. And DEQ's got your back. We're all about helping businesses like yours find smart ways to dial down toxic and hazardous chemicals. And guess what? Our technical assistance program is the real deal. It's free and non-regulatory. Get in touch with us today and let's set up a free visit to get your game plan rolling. When thinking about the chemicals you use and the wastes you create, take a second and remember the people on your team who work with them directly, the communities taking on the waste, and how a spill could impact your neighbors. Society gives companies the privilege of creating and using these hazardous materials because we appreciate their products. Using these hazardous materials isn't a right. Don't waste it. Check out these horror stories about chemical incidents. Trust me, you don't want your company stealing the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Imagine if your waste or chemicals spilled near where your family lives, works, and plays. Not a pleasant thought, right? Now that we've learned about RCRA and its goals, let's examine a crucial and often overlooked part of it, the hazardous waste determination. Not taking the time to figure out if something is hazardous is one of the top violations our inspectors find during compliance inspections. Whenever your business throws something away, you must determine whether it's hazardous waste. Sure, if I spilled soda, I would know it's not a hazardous waste by the nature of the ingredients. But not everything is so easy. If you're working with chemicals, it can be a guessing game unless you know for sure. And you have to know before you dispose. There are two key ways to conduct a hazardous waste determination: knowledge and analysis. Today we will learn how to make these determinations. Since the waste is being disposed of, documentation is all we have left to prove the waste went to the right place. Ensure you document everything, keep those documents, and know how to access them in case of an emergency or when an inspector requests them. When making a hazardous waste determination, use all the tools you have. One tool you can use is knowledge of process and product, which includes safety data sheets, labels, and other process knowledge. However, those only go so far. A process will almost always change or contaminate the original chemical. When using SDSs, remember that they represent a virgin product and won't be accurate at the end of a process. An SDS also won't list a chemical unless it's over 10,000 parts per million, or 1% for non-carcinogens, and 1,000 parts per million, or 0.1% for carcinogens. When considering how a process can impact waste, ask yourself how this operation or process affects, changes, or alters the waste. Does it make the waste more concentrated, more diluted? Does the material pick up contamination along the way? SDSs, labels, supplier information, and even trade associations can help, but don't rely only on these. One critical factor in using knowledge to make a hazardous waste determination is the knowledge must be correct. In other words, the applied knowledge must be valid and verifiable. And don't forget to document it and save that documentation. Analysis is the other tool to use. Analysis means lab testing. Sometimes testing is necessary to complete a proper hazardous waste determination. For example, you could use process knowledge to determine whether there is chromium in a waste stream. The next step is determining the chromium concentration in the waste. In order to determine concentrations, a representative sample needs to be collected and sent to a certified lab for analysis using the toxicity characteristic leaching procedure, also called TCLIP, which determines how many milligrams per liter of specific chemicals are present in the waste. For chromium, if there is 5 milligrams per liter or higher, the waste stream would be a hazardous waste. Another example of when analysis would be required is if there's an unknown waste stream. An unknown waste stream can become very expensive because many lab tests may be needed to determine what it is so that it can be properly disposed of. Lastly, the regulations are the final say. If you're unsure, you can always go back and check the regulations. Making a hazardous waste determination is as simple as asking these 5 questions. This is your roadmap to a proper hazardous waste determination. Train your team to follow these same steps. When a waste question pops up, these steps keep things structured and consistent. The first step to a hazardous waste determination is to ask yourself, is this a solid waste? And don't let the word solid trick you. Under RCRA, solid waste is any solid, liquid, semi-solid sludge, or contained gas that is discarded. Discarded means it is abandoned, disposed of, burned, or incinerated. It can also be considered inherently waste-like. Some materials are automatically in the solid waste club because they're a consistent threat. There's no free pass for them. They get the maximum regulatory treatment. And here's a curveball. Even recycled waste fall under the solid waste label in RCRA. Recycled material is at the end of its life and needs proper management. Recycling, reclaiming, and reusing could fill a whole training session, but the golden rule is to always check if it's a hazardous waste. Now that we know that for our waste to be hazardous, it must first be solid waste. And don't let solid fool you. It can be solid, liquid, semi-solid sludge, or contained gas. And remember, if it's not solid waste, like a viable product, the ones that aren't expired and still good to go, it can't be a hazardous waste. That was step 1. Pretty easy, right? The next step in the hazardous waste determination process is to ask yourself, is the waste excluded or exempt from RCRA regulations? Let's chat about some RCRA-specific language. Exclusions and exemptions. These are kind of like the VIP passes of the waste world. An exclusion is like the bouncer of the solid waste club saying, you're not on the list. It keeps a material out of the solid and therefore the hazardous waste club, meaning RCRA doesn't cover it. On the other hand, an exemption is in the solid and hazardous waste club, but as long as it follows certain conditions, it gets a free pass from some RCRA rules. It's like saying you're allowed in the club, but make sure you play by the rules, or you'll have to follow even more rules. On the next slide, we'll discuss some of these exempt materials. Let's dive a little deeper into RCRA exclusions and exemptions. These wastes are excluded wastes under RCRA. The Clean Water Act covers most of these, including domestic sewage and industrial waste discharge. The third one here, secondary material reclaimed and reused in the original process, was never really a waste. Think about it this way. You have a 2x4 that's 8 feet long. You cut off 4 feet of it and use that. The other 4 feet isn't waste, it can be reused within the original process. You can find the full list of exclusions in the regulations. Take a look and see if your waste is excluded. You'll remember exemptions are still solid and hazardous waste, but get a pass from the full set of RCRA rules if certain conditions are followed. These include some reclaimed and recycled materials. Although closed-loop recycling is exempt, the sludge from its filters may be hazardous waste and would need a determination made. We'll cover more on universal waste in the next slide, but before that, here's a quick tip. Even if you've determined your waste is exempt, give it a periodic checkup. RCRA jumps in if there are any physical or chemical changes to the waste. Document your exemptions and keep them in your files. Now let's meet EPA's Universal Waste Program. Chances are your business generates at least one of the 5 materials in the Universal Waste Club. And when managing following the Universal Waste rules, they're less of a threat to humans and the environment. The Universal Waste Program encourages recycling, improves compliance, and keeps certain hazardous waste from the regular garbage. Although these items are exempt from the full set of RCRA rules and don't count towards your hazardous waste totals if managed to meet the universal waste standards, there are still rules that need to be followed to stay compliant. Remember, universal waste is still hazardous waste, but when managed under these rules, it receives some regulatory relief. The items covered under universal waste rules include batteries, pesticides, mercury-containing equipment, mercury-containing lamps, and most recently, aerosol cans. Small quantity universal waste handlers, that's someone who accumulates less than 11,000 pounds of universal waste at any time, get special treatment when using the universal waste rules. Longer accumulation timeframes, no hazardous waste manifest for shipping, and say goodbye to land disposal restrictions, and much more. It's a sweet deal, right? Make sure to follow the rules, and these benefits are all yours. Just a heads up, big collectors and handlers of universal waste need an EPA ID number and to give DEQ a heads up. Now you know how to check for exclusions and exemptions in RCRA. That takes us to step 3 of the hazardous waste determination. This is when you ask yourself, is the waste a listed hazardous waste? Let's dive into listed hazardous wastes. These are the fantastic 4, F, K, P, and U. First up, the dynamic duo of F and K wastes. These wastes are all about how and where they came from. You need to channel your inner detective for F and K wastes and get the scoop on their origin story. Where and how these wastes are generated determines their listing. The other dynamic duo of listed wastes are the P and U lists. These are pure, unused chemicals or the sole active ingredient. Let's take a look at each one of these one by one. The first category we're going to cover is the F-listed wastes. These are most commonly spent solvents, but can also come from other wastes. To be an F-listed solvent, a waste needs to meet 3 simple criteria. 1, it must have been used for cleaning, degreasing, or other solvent duties, basically breaking down or dissolving stuff. 2, the solvent must be spent, meaning it's retired and unfit for action without being regenerated, reclaimed, or otherwise repurposed. And 3, before its use, the concentration must be 10% or higher. We'll dig into this more on the next slide. F-listed wastes could be from spent solvent wastes, electroplating and other metal finishing wastes, wood preserving wastes, and more. Even regs used with these spent solvents may carry an F listing. Remember, the most common F listings have to be spent. If a forklift knocked over a new drum of acetone, it wouldn't be an F-listed waste because it wasn't spent yet. But once that acetone works its magic, say stripping paint, and becomes spent, it can earn its F-listing badge. Let's dive deeper into the F-listing details. Remember, for an F-listing to apply, the concentration must be 10% or more before use. Imagine this scenario. We have a cleaning solvent, and after a hard day's work, we're done using it, and it's spent. Before its use, it contained 5% carbon tetrachloride with the waste code F001, 2% methylene chloride with the waste code F002, and 5% toluene with the waste code F005. Even with 85% other stuff in there, the total concentration of listed solvents before use hit a whopping 12%. The waste earns the waste code F001, F002, and F005 because the total is 10% or more before use. Had those percentages added up to less than 10%, the listings would not apply. Switching gears, let's chat about K-listed wastes. These are from certain industrial processes. Most of you won't need to decipher these codes, but knowledge is power. You never know when you might need it. The K waste most often found in Oregon is K001 for wood treaters. These listings are pretty specific. For instance, that K001 code describes, quote, bottom sediment sludge from the treatment of wastewaters from wood-preserving processes that use creosote and/or pentachlorophenol. Take a peek at the K-listed wastes and check if they fit into your industry. If not, no worries. Just keep moving on. Other industries in the K-listed club include organic chemical manufacturing, pesticide manufacturing, petroleum refining, and inorganic chemical manufacturing. Let's chat about P and U listed wastes. These are unused commercial chemical products or the sole active ingredient in a material. They sometimes sneak up on folks, leading generators to believe they have a U or P listed waste when they actually don't. You might be asking yourself, who would toss out an unused product? Well, expired chemicals, off-spec products, container residues, container liners, spills, and much more can generate P and U listed wastes. Remember that drum of acetone the forklift driver knocked over earlier? Since it wasn't spent, it couldn't be F listed waste. It's unused, and acetone was the sole active ingredient. Looking at the U listed chemicals, you'll find acetone there. P listed waste is acutely toxic, and even small amounts are treated like much larger quantities of other listed wastes. A word of caution when navigating the confusing world of chemical names. Chemicals often masquerade under different names. Take methyl ethyl ketone, for instance. It also goes by MEK and 2-butanone. You might miss it if you search for one name and not the other. So consult chemical dictionaries, EPA's list of lists, or use the Chemical Abstract Number, or CAS, to ensure you've got the right waste on your radar. These chemicals can have a lot of names, but only one CAS number. In step 3, we figured out if our waste is a listed waste. We're almost done with the hazardous waste determination. Now it's time to unravel the next layer. Is our waste a characteristic hazardous waste? And here's the twist. Wastes can have both listed and characteristic qualities, or they might just have one of the two. So don't hit pause just because you have a listed hazardous waste. Keep going through all the steps. Unlike the listed wastes, F, K, P, and U, the characteristic wastes are hazardous due to their physical or chemical traits. If a waste has one of these characteristics, it is a hazardous waste. Let's break it down step by step and get to know these characteristic wastes. The first of the characteristic hazardous wastes, the ignitable ones. If you have a waste liquid with a flash point lower than 140 degrees Fahrenheit, you have an ignitable hazardous waste. Also, if your waste is a solid or gas that can spark a blaze through friction, absorption of moisture, or chemical change and goes ablaze when ignited, Welcome to the Ignitable Waste Crew. And if the DOT calls it an oxidizer, it's in too. Ignitable hazardous wastes carry the waste code D001. A fun fact, EPA chose 140 degrees Fahrenheit because in everyday life of storage and travel, things can heat up. Picture a drum soaking in the sun. It could hit less than 140 degrees. Remember, low flash point means trouble, and high flash point means smooth sailing. Some examples include petroleum parts washer solvents, solvent-based paint waste, and waste kerosene or gasoline. A corrosive hazardous waste is a liquid with a pH of less than 2 or more than 12.5. The reason the EPA picked these numbers is pretty interesting. Soda syrup and fruit juice usually have a pH of around 2.5 to 3, and EPA didn't want your favorite drinks turning into hazardous waste, so they set the limit accordingly. Here's another fun fact. If a liquid can corrode steel at a rate higher than 1/4 inch per year, it falls into the corrosive hazardous waste category. Imagine that stuff eating through a metal drum. Not a mess you want to clean up. Remember to use containers that can handle these materials when dealing with corrosives. We call these compatible containers. Don't risk it with metal drums. They don't stand a chance. Corrosive hazardous wastes carry the waste code D002. And one more thing about pH. EPA and DEQ don't consider pH paper an accurate determination tool. A pH probe should be used instead. Next, let's talk about reactive wastes. These troublemakers react to water, shock, heat, or pressure and undergo a violent chemical reaction or generate toxic gases. These feisty wastes carry the code D003. Here's something to watch out for. Certain chemicals, like peroxides, can age and become unstable, reactive crystals. If your business deals with reactive wastes, you've got to be on your A game because storing and moving this stuff is no joke. Safety first. Let's wrap up the characteristic wastes with toxic hazardous wastes. Figuring out how toxic a waste is involves the lab doing some detective work, analyzing a sample using a test called the Toxicity Characteristic Leaching Procedure, or T-CLIP. A certified lab runs the T-CLIP and compares the results to 40 of the most common toxins found in Superfund sites, including 8 heavy metals, 10 pesticides, and 22 organic chemicals. The goal of this all? To simulate what might leach from the waste in a landfill over a 100-year period. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The test tells us if the waste is a threat to the environment or relatively harmless. Regulations have set levels, and if your waste meets or exceeds them, it's officially on the list for the toxicity characteristic. For instance, take benzene. The regulatory level is a tiny 0.5 milligrams per liter. Yeah, you heard that right. It's tiny. If your waste has 0.5 milligrams per liter or more of benzene, it's in the toxic club and gets the waste code D018. Let me tell you a cool trick. Using both knowledge and analysis to make a determination. Take paint booth exhaust filters, for instance. Instead of shelling out big bucks for testing all 8 RCRA metals, which could cost thousands of dollars, you can be smart about it. You can drop the cost into hundreds by targeting just the specific metals you know are in your waste. That will save you some serious cash. Step 4 introduced us to the 4 characteristic wastes: ignitable, corrosive, reactive, and toxic. Now we only have one step left. We're at the last leg of our hazardous waste determination journey. The EPA gives states the green light to go above and beyond the basic RCRA rules. Being the overachiever we are, Oregon tossed some exclusive Oregon-only hazardous wastes into the mix. But here's the catch. A waste stream that is listed or characteristic is a federal hazardous waste, and therefore can't be a state-only hazardous waste. Keep that in mind as you navigate the hazardous waste territory. The Oregon-only hazardous wastes are an extra layer of protection, going above and beyond the basic RCRA regulations. These are wastes with a 3% or higher concentration of P-listed wastes and their leftovers or residues, and a 10% or higher concentration of U-listed wastes and their residues. Plus, because of the Umatilla Army Depot, we've added nerve agents and mustard gases into the mix. Talk about heavy-duty waste control. And that's not all. Some non-RCRA pesticides are on the state-only list, too. Now, here's the code to remember. X001. It's the go-to waste code for all non-RCRA pesticides. But here's the kicker. 10 RCRA pesticides will join the X001 club only if they don't exceed their respective T-clip limits. And there we have it, the 5 steps of a hazardous waste determination. Before we move on to learning about generator categories, let's quickly talk about a few hazardous waste determination pointers to keep in your back pocket. First, nail down that determination right at the point of generation, before the waste can be diluted or mixed. Think of it like catching the waste at the moment of its creation, like when you're cleaning out a filter. There's a reason we say RCRA is cradle to grave. Now, if you're a small or large quantity generator, that's an SQG or LQG, keep your records in check. You have to show your work for how you made each determination. And even if you're a very small quantity generator, or VSQG, it's a good idea to jot down that info too. Although it's not mandatory for VSQGs, how can you show you did a determination without the paperwork? When it comes to testing, play it safe. Treat the waste as hazardous until the lab results give you the green light. Put a label that says hazardous waste pending analysis, or just plain hazardous waste. Add in the accumulation start date and any other required labels. That way, you're covered if an inspector comes knocking or there's an emergency. And if the waste turns out to be non-hazardous, you can ditch the labels hassle-free. Lastly, keep an eye on your waste. If it changes its tune, maybe it's exposed to the environment or you've got some new ingredients or processes in the mix, you must revisit that determination. Now that we've figured out what is and isn't a hazardous waste, it's time to put that knowledge to good use and figure out your generator category. Knowing your generator category is a big deal. This is how you know which RCRA rules apply to you and which are optional. There are 3 tiers of generator categories: very small, small, and large quantity generators. These tiers are based on how much hazardous waste you generate each month. Before we dive into the categories, let's chat about what you should and shouldn't include in your waste count. We're talking about the stuff you store, dispose of, treat, recycle, or even consider as waste right from the get-go, that is, at the point of generation. When it comes to recycled waste, count it until it transforms into a commercial commodity and gets recycled. After that, you can subtract the weight from your monthly totals. Here's the cool part. Some wastes get a free pass and don't make it into the count. These are the ones excluded under the Clean Water Act, exempt under recycling rules, managed without prior storage, and wastes that have been through elementary neutralization. Everything else, you must count. To know your generator status, you must keep tabs on how much waste you're churning out each month, including in your satellite accumulation areas. Keep a log of what's going into your SAAs, and here's a pro tip. Ditch the manifests for tracking your generator status, unless you're shipping waste out every single month. Why? Let me break it down. Imagine this. Your facility had 400 pounds of waste picked up, but it wasn't all generated in a single month. Now, if you're dividing that 400 pounds over 2 months, you might think you're a very small quantity generator at 200 pounds a month. Easy peasy, right? Well, what if business was booming in one month and not the other? The waste wouldn't be split evenly. Maybe you generated 100 pounds in one month and went all out with 300 pounds the next. Surprise, surprise, now you're a small quantity generator. So watch those numbers and don't let the waste math throw you off. Now it's time to break down the generator categories one by one. And yes, every facility fits into one of these. First off, let's look at your VSQG, which stands for Very Small Quantity Generator. It might sound a bit new because it replaced the old term CEG, or Conditionally Exempt Generator, when the Generator Improvement Rules passed a few years back. Here's the deal. VSQGs generate less than 220 pounds of hazardous waste per month and stay below 2.2 pounds of acutely hazardous waste. If VSQGs accumulate 2,200 pounds or more of hazardous waste, they need to contact DEQ to learn about specific handling requirements. Next in line, we've got the SQGs, or small quantity generators. They're the middle ground, generating more than the 220 pounds, but less than 2,200 pounds of hazardous waste each month. Their storage limit is capped at 13,200 pounds, and they play it safe with no more than 2.2 pounds of acutely hazardous waste. Lastly, let's talk about the big players, the LQGs, or large quantity generators. These generators churn out more than 2,200 pounds of hazardous waste, or 2.2 pounds of acutely hazardous waste. There's no waste storage limit for these generators. Now, you see a bunch of twos in these numbers, because back when RCRA was written, the US was flirting with the metric system. And 2.2 pounds is basically 1 kilogram. Starting with the smallest generators in the game, VSQGs, they have the least rules to follow. They need to make that hazardous waste determination, track their waste totals to prove they are a VSQG, and send their waste to a facility that can take it. And that's about it. Next up is the middle tier in the hazardous waste generator club, small quantity generators, or SQGs. These folks step it up a bit from the very small quantity generators, and this is where more regulations start to kick in. First, SQGs need to have an EPA DEQ ID number, file an annual report, and pay fees to DEQ for the waste they're generating. You can handle all of this on the Your DEQ Online website. When it comes to storing wastes, SQGs play it by the clock. Waste can't be stored on site for longer than 180 days. If the disposal facility is more than 200 miles away, though, SQGs get a little extension to 270 days. SQGs need to ace the container management game. Label everything, keep those containers closed, and follow all the other container management requirements. Shipping out hazardous waste? SQGs do it right through a registered hazardous waste transporter and the trusty hazardous waste manifest in tow. And here's a sneak peek. SQGs need a modified contingency plan, but we'll dive into that topic later. Let's shift gears to the big dogs, the large quantity generators, or LQGs. They're like the older siblings to the small quantity generators, playing by many of the same rules, but with more responsibility and much higher expectations. Just like SQGs, LQGs need the EPA ID number, use manifests for shipping, nail the labeling and container game, and file an annual report while paying fees to DEQ. Here's where it gets interesting. Unlike SQGs, LQGs do not have a cap on how much waste they can generate. But there's a catch. They can only store their waste for 90 days before it's shipped off into the world. LQGs have weekly or daily inspections on their plate, depending on the type of containers they're dealing with. LQGs must step it up with more robust contingency plans and training requirements. If you're an LQG, get ready for a bit more hustle and bustle. You've got big time regulations, but I know you can handle it. And remember, if you don't want to deal with all the requirements, you can always work to reduce your waste. Reach out to your local DEQ technical advisor if you need help getting started. But what happens if your facility exceeds a generator status limit? Say you hit more than 220 pounds in a month as a VSQG, or you cross the small quantity generator limit just once. It's not an automatic jump to the next level. It's more like a maybe. Suppose you find yourself generating more than the allowed limit. In that case, you typically slide into the next generator category, unless you've got your act together, applied for, and received the thumbs up from DEQ for an episodic generation event. But hold that thought. We'll dive into episodic generation events on the next slide. Let's say the episodic generation event didn't get the green light. In that case, brace yourself to switch to the next generator category, complete with all the extra requirements. Think training, contingency planning, and reporting. If your facility is in this fix, reach out to your regional technical assistance specialist for a helping hand. They've got your back. Check this out. VSQGs and SQGs get a couple of chances each year to maintain their generator status while generating more waste than is typically allowed with what's called an episodic generation event. There's two kinds, planned and unplanned, and you can apply for each only once a year. In either case, you need approval from DEQ, pay the fees, and report the waste. Planned episodic generation events are things like chemical cleanouts or maintenance. For these, you have to give DEQ a heads up at least 30 days in advance. Once you get approval and wait your 30 days, you get 60 days to clear the waste from your site. SQGs even have the option to treat the waste on-site. When it comes to unplanned events, things like emergencies or spills, you have to notify DEQ within 72 hours of the incident. Then, within 5 days of that initial notification, send over a written notification via the site identification form in your DEQ online to keep things official. So whether it's planned or a surprise event, you have rules to follow. But that's the hazardous waste life. Just like the term solid waste, RCRA has its own definition of empty, and it's a big deal. This definition is critical because you don't want to toss those empty drums and containers into the mix when figuring out your generator category. Here's the deal. You need to keep a log of containers, noting down the date, condition, your initials, and any comments. A container is officially RCRA empty only when you've followed the usual container emptying practices and there's no more than the specified amounts left. Let's talk about common container emptying practices. It's all about doing what makes sense for what's inside. Give it a good pour into another container if it's a liquid. Something thicker, maybe scraping actions in order. Dealing with a big container, pump the material out. And here's the key. If there's still some product hanging around that can come out easily, it's probably not RCRA empty. For containers up to 110 gallons, you can't have more than 1 inch or 3% left after emptying it. For the big ones, those over 110 gallons, keep it to no more than 0.3%. It's all in the regulations at 40 CFR 261.7 if you want to dig into the nitty-gritty. There's a catch with RCRA empty. If your container housed a P-listed acutely hazardous waste, it has to go through a triple rinse with a solvent that can kick out the waste to be considered RCRA empty. And the solvent used to clean it now has to be managed as a P-listed waste. If it held other pesticides or really any other kind of side, it has to be decontaminated according to Oregon Administrative Rule 340, Division 109, to get the green light as RCRA empty and not as hazardous waste. We've learned how to identify and count our wastes. Now, let's dive into the critical art of storing hazardous waste safely. There are two key spots for storing waste: the satellite and central accumulation areas. Hang tight. We'll break down each one of these in a second. First up, satellite accumulation areas are like the front lines, right where the waste is generated. SAAs have volume limits to keep things in check. On the flip side, we've got the central accumulation areas, the heavyweights that handle larger amounts of waste. These areas don't use volume limits. Instead, they rely on time limits to keep everything on the up and up. We get a fair amount of questions about satellite accumulation areas, so let's break it down. SAAs are the spot where you can store up to 55 gallons per waste stream right where the waste is generated, as long as it's under the operator's watchful eye. It's like having a mini storage spot to avoid mix-ups with the wrong waste going into the wrong drum. When we say under the control of the operator, we mean the waste collection point has to be close to where the work is happening. In the rare case that it's unsafe to store the waste close to the point of generation, it might be stored a bit further away. Throw in some signage or a locking lid, but keep it under the operator's control. No need to worry about start dates or time limits while filling SAAs. But once that container hits its limit or reaches 55 gallons, put the start date on it. You have only 3 days to move it to the central accumulation area or off-site. If it's moving to the CAA, start the 180 or 90-day clock once it's there. Here's the golden rule. Keep those SAA containers closed unless you're actively adding, removing, or venting waste through an approved device like a pressure relief valve. Don't forget to label the containers with hazardous waste and a heads up about the hazards of the contents. And don't forget, SAA waste counts towards your monthly generator status, so log it to make sure you're in the right category. Moving over to the central accumulation area, or CAA, which also sometimes gets the name of the 90 or 180-day accumulation area. This area is where hazardous waste hangs out until it gets picked up by a transporter. If you're in the small or large quantity generator club, you have to do weekly inspections of your CAA. If you use tanks, daily inspections are required. Make life easy with a checklist or log to keep track of things like aisle space, leaks, and labels. Get your staff on board with detailed checklists, signatures or initials for each inspection, and notes on what was fixed. Listen, we all make mistakes occasionally, and DEQ gets it. Believe me, we like to see issues being found and corrected, not covered up and undocumented. All of this helps make inspection a breeze for your team and for DEQ's inspectors. Make sure your CAAs follow all the requirements such as aisle space, fire response equipment, and signage. Ensuring everyone knows what's inside your containers and tanks is vital for the safe and efficient management of waste. Lucky for you, there are several options to pick from. You can list the hazardous waste characteristics, put a DOT hazard class label or placard, slap on an OSHA pictogram, or maybe even an NFPA chemical hazard label. DEQ doesn't tell you what system you use, but make sure you're following one of them. Now, a heads up before your waste container hits the road. They need labels that satisfy DOT hazardous materials regulations and RCRA shipping requirements. Let's talk about hazardous waste tanks. We don't see many of them in Oregon, but if you've got them, Get ready for a few extra inspections and requirements. And here's a little secret. Any stationary or hard-piped container could be a tank. The requirements include daily inspections, a professional engineer's stamp of approval, containment, and more. If your company uses tanks and you have more questions, chat with your DEQ technical assistance specialist for the full scoop. Now, let's dive into the world of on-site treatment. EPA defines treatment as anything that gives hazardous waste a makeover. That is, changes its physical, chemical, or biological characteristic or composition, neutralizes it, reduces it in volume, recovers energy and material resources, or simply makes it less hazardous or safer to handle, transport, store, or dispose of. For our very small quantity generators, the treatment options are pretty limited. You can't treat much unless they have an exemption, like dealing with photo fixers or sludge presses that aren't hooked up to the sewer. Now, things get a little more interesting for small and large quantity generators. These generators get a green light for treatment without a permit, but of course, there are conditions. Treatment can happen without a permit for waste-treated and wastewater treatment units. Treatment in those CAA 180 or 90-day accumulation units. Recycling, always a good option. Elementary neutralization, it's simple and effective. Treatment in totally enclosed treatment facilities, make sure it's kept nice and tight. Adding absorbents to waste, you gotta soak it all up. Immediate response, that's when you've got to act fast for a spill or an emergency. Now here's the deal. Treatment comes with a few requirements. You have to prepare a modified contingency plan and stick to it. Have a written waste analysis plan in your generator files, and treatment can only happen in closed tanks and containers within the central accumulation area. Recycling hazardous waste isn't quite the same as treatment, but it plays in the same sandbox and gets the treatment label. When you recycle material, their weight contributes to your monthly generator totals. But here's the good news. Once the recycling happens, and you've got the proof to back it up, you can subtract those totals from your overall generation for the month. Just ensure you have the paperwork to vouch for the recycling. If the recycling facility can't hand over a certificate of recycling or any legitimate documentation, it's time to find someone who can. This is probably a good time to remind you that you are responsible for your waste from cradle to grave. Oregon rolled out its hazardous secondary material, or HSM rules, on January 1st, 2023, which are slightly different from the federal rules. What's HSM, you ask? It's a hazardous secondary material, like spent substances, byproducts, or sludges. If tossing out would make it a hazardous waste, it's an HSM. Now, pay attention. All you large, small, and very small quantity hazardous waste generators, if you're recycling HSM or aiming for a variance from managing a specific, legitimately recycled hazardous material, these rules are your guide. If you create HSM, you're an HSM generator. When shipping hazardous secondary material off-site for recycling, get it on record. DEQ has a form for you, or you can use your own. Here's the rule to remember for HSM. To be counted as recycled, at least 75% of the material needs to find a new life through recycling or head off to a different site for recycling within the calendar year it was born. And just like other hazardous wastes, store HSM in closed containers or tanks with proper labeling, and don't forget to note the accumulation start date. Now, if you're an HSM generator, it's your job to ensure you check all the legitimacy criteria boxes. Keep the documentation of this legitimacy journey on site, ready for your compliance inspector. The doc should spell out how your recycling meets the first 3 factors of the legitimacy criteria in 40 CFR 5.43a, and how Factor 4 was considered to determine the overall legitimacy of each recycling activity. Hold on to this documentation for 3 years post-recycling. DEQ's not picky about the format, but we have a nifty template called Documentation of Legitimate Recycling, if you need a helping hand. It's all about keeping the recycling game legit and documented. Let's talk about shipping waste. For small and large quantity generators, it's all about the Uniform Hazardous Waste Manifest, when your hazardous waste is ready to hit the road. The manifest has all the details your waste needs for its journey, from waste codes to amounts to your generator information, and signatures get collected along the entire way from everyone who handles it. Once your waste reaches its final destination, whether it's an incinerator, a landfill, or something else, that receiving facility is on the hook to send you a copy of the manifest, complete with all those signatures. Your job? Save the completed manifest in your records. Take a peek at what a manifest looks like on paper. But, and here's a big but, before you add your signature, make sure that the manifest is correct and ready to roll. Read through it, double check those waste codes and weights, and don't skip over the waste minimization certification statement. You can't miss it here, it's in orange. Here's a hot tip. Don't let your hazardous waste vendor play the find somebody or any warm body will do game for signatures. EPA's requirements for preparing and signing Uniform Hazardous Waste Manifests are based on the Department of Transportation regulations and require the person signing the manifest to have, quote, first-hand knowledge of the information listed on the manifest and the regulations applying to the waste. Pick your designated person and their trusty backup carefully. Once your waste has embarked on its manifest adventure, it's crucial to get the original or a signed copy back to you. Small quantity generators, stay alert. You should have that manifest back within 60 days from when the waste first left. But if it decides to stay on the road a bit longer, don't hesitate to send a copy of the manifest to DEQ along with a friendly letter detailing what happened. For large quantity generators, you're working on a tighter schedule. If the manifest hasn't made its way back within 35 days of your waste's journey, give the TSDF, that's your treatment, storage, and disposal facility, a heads up. Reach out via phone, email, or drop them a letter to play detective and track down your missing manifest. If you're coming up on 45 days and your manifest is still MIA, it's time to write up an exception letter and send it off to DEQ. Remember, the manifest journey isn't complete until it makes its way back home, so stay on top of those timelines and be sure to keep manifests for the 3 years. Shipping waste comes with its own rules, both the Department of Transportation and RCRA. It's crucial to know and adhere to all the guidelines. Oh, and here's a heads up. If you're putting pen to paper on the manifest, you're stepping into DOT training territory. Make sure you take that training too. Now, don't think the rule book ends with RCRA and DOT. Hold tight, because the National Fire Protection Association and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration also have rules. Let's dive into the land disposal restrictions, or LDRs. These are the rules making sure hazardous waste doesn't threaten our health and the environment when it's placed into or onto the land. When bidding farewell to your waste, whether it's landing in a landfill, surface impoundment, waste pile, injection well, land treatment facility, underground mines, caves, or even in concrete, there's a rule. Treat it or contain it. No long-term risks allowed. Quick tip for very small quantity generators. You get a pass on the LDRs if your waste is sent to specific facilities. Here's the drill for LDR notifications. You send one with the first batch of waste. If everything stays the same with your waste, there's no need for another LDR notification until something changes. And here's the secret. Most generators call in the pros, contractors, to treat their waste and ensure it meets the LDR standards. Here's a quick recap of some key points we've discussed. Keep in mind that large quantity generators face a comprehensive set of requirements, and what we've highlighted is just a portion of the entire list. It's crucial to familiarize yourself with all pertinent regulations for a thorough understanding. Make sure to stay informed. Let's shift gears and dive into the world of preparedness and contingency planning. First up, don't neglect your emergency equipment. Keep it well maintained and do some tests to make sure it's ready for action. And drills? Yeah, those aren't just for school fire alarms. Run drills from time to time. Let your team feel the emergency vibes and make sure everyone knows the routine. Here's some good advice for you. Aisle space. It's not just about giving containers breathing room. It's a crucial part of the emergency plan. When those first responders swoop in, you want them to be able to move through without any obstacles. Add checking aisle space to your weekly central accumulation area inspection checklist. There are no rules about exactly how much space is needed, but you need enough space for someone decked out in full emergency gear to move freely between containers. Once you've made plans, don't stash them in a dusty drawer or on a shelf. Send them where they need to go and actually use them during those practice runs. And here's a tip. Send them via registered email or get a read receipt in an email and keep that proof in your files. Emergency numbers, those are your lifeline. Save them in your cell phones, hand out wallet-sized cards, and ensure everyone knows who to call when things hit the fan. Oh, and don't forget about our buddy OSHA. Get familiar with their guidelines, and if you can swing it, send staff to HazWhopper training. Let's break down the requirements for small quantity generator contingency plans. First off, designate your emergency coordinator. It's an important job. Put it in their job description, and it's always good to have a backup coordinator in case your main hero is off on vacation, battling a cold, or exploring new career realms. Next, gear up your squad with some training. Those handling hazardous waste should know the ropes, especially when it comes to spills or emergencies. Knowledge is power. Emergency info, don't just tuck it away. Post it prominently and keep it fresh. Include a quick check into your weekly inspection log. Make sure those emergency contact sheets are up to date. Nobody likes outdated information. It's like a violation magnet. Last but not least, give a shout out to those heroes in your community. Notify those emergency responders. They're the cavalry, and a heads up can make all the difference. Safety first, always. When it comes to requirements, large quantity generators share the same baseline as SQGs, but they add a few extra elements, such as documented training and other additional items. LQGs have an extra responsibility. They should try to arrange with local authorities like the police, fire departments, emergency response teams, contractors, equipment suppliers, local hospitals, and the local emergency planning committee to acquaint them with the layout of the facility and the characteristics of the hazardous waste stored and used on site. Now, there's a new player in town, the Quick Reference Guide. Make sure your facility has one and keep it regularly updated. Let's talk about very small quantity generators. Technically, the regulations don't demand a contingency plan from them. However, having a contingency plan is a wise move for anyone dealing with hazardous waste. It's a best practice to be prepared for emergencies. For LQGs, it's not just about training. It's about focused training, tailored to your specific facility and the waste managed. This training should be overseen by someone skilled in hazardous waste management procedures. Ensure your team is well versed in both waste handling procedures and emergency systems. However, a heads up, this training isn't an all-encompassing solution. Don't forget about your training on your contingency plan. Make sure to carry out the training, document it in your training log, and you'll be ready. Always keep safety at the forefront. To summarize preparedness and planning, this table indicates that very small quantity generators have the fewest requirements, whereas large quantity generators have the most. Remembering that this table doesn't encompass all the requirements. Now that we know all about safety and preparedness, let's talk about annual reporting. SQGs and LQGs are required to maintain records such as manifests, land disposal restriction documents, and waste analysis plans. Each March, all SQGs, LQGs, and some VSQGs will receive notification in your DEQ Online to pay their annual fees and submit reports detailing the quantity and types of waste generated in the previous year. While the Toxic Use Reduction Plan is a one-time initiative, it must be regularly updated. If your team hasn't reviewed your TUR plan recently, it's a good idea to take a look and make any necessary updates. Digital storage of records is acceptable, but they must be easily accessible for inspectors upon request. In Oregon, any discharge of a listed constituent into the state waters must be reported. In the case of petroleum, not explicitly listed, this includes any release that could potentially create a sheen. It's advisable to err on the side of caution and over-reporting rather than under-reporting. You can find more information about reportable quantities at 40 CFR 302.4. There are a few specific wastes we want to highlight. First up, we have used oil. There's a variety of used oils, including lubricants, hydraulic fluids, heat transfer oil, brake fluid, grease, and machine cutting oil, among others. If you generate this type of waste, it's crucial to ensure proper management. Numerous oil recyclers are available, and it's essential to research and choose a company that follows the right procedures. While regulations don't mandate used oil to be in closed containers, it must be protected from rainwater. Opting for a closed container is the simplest way to comply with this regulation. Make sure to label your used oil appropriately and maintain documentation outlining how it is managed. Good news for laundered rags and wipes. They get an exemption. Rags and wipes used with listed solvents can go through laundering without being counted as hazardous waste. Just run them through the hazardous waste determination step to check if your rags are listed. Keep in mind, the laundry rule doesn't apply to rags and wipes exhibiting non-solvent hazardous waste characteristics. Used rags often lose their hazardous waste status by the time they become waste. For example, a rag used with isopropyl alcohol. By the time it's used up, the IPA might have dried, and it would no longer be deemed hazardous after a determination. However, intentionally leaving rags out to dry is considered illegal treatment, so handle them properly. Don't forget to label the containers holding these rags and wipes correctly, and make sure to contain and manage any free liquids properly. In 2021, new regulations were adopted for pharmaceuticals and certain nicotine wastes, specifically P075 waste. The P075 waste category encompasses FDA-approved over-the-counter nicotine replacement therapies like gums, lozenges, and patches. The pharmaceutical rule is applicable to healthcare facilities and reverse distributors, and it is both sector and waste specific. The definition of a healthcare facility is broad. Check out DEQ's website for pharmaceutical rule specific training. Lastly, discovering abandoned waste on your property is no fun. It is your responsibility to address and clean it up. Assistance may be available for associated fees. If you find yourself in this situation, reach out to DEQ for guidance. Who doesn't want fewer regulations, more money in the budget, and safer employees? Pollution prevention and waste minimization can help you achieve all these goals. All hazardous waste generators that sign a manifest attest to having a waste minimization plan. Does your company have a plan? Is it updated and followed? Maybe it's time to take a look and see if you're meeting your requirements. You may be familiar with the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, continuous improvement, Lean, Six Sigma, or others. Apply this methodology to chemical reduction too. Step 1 of any successful campaign is to get top-level buy-in. Without this support, it will be hard to secure resources in terms of staff time, money, and support. Second, set your goals and don't forget to add dates. It can be something like research a different chemical by the end of the year, or something more ambitious like switch all solvents to non-listed in the next 2 years. Third, write out the actions you and your team must take to reach your goals. Then put them on the calendar and check in on them often. Lastly, engage your staff. Hopefully, they've been involved from the start, but when it's time to switch something else, don't just hand them a new product and say good luck. Work with them to understand why the change is happening. Get them on board and excited about the change. Provide them with the knowledge to do the work. Start small and make sure it works. And lastly, reinforce the positive and tweak as needed. You should now better understand the basics of hazardous waste management under RCRA. Take this learning to the next level with free technical assistance from DEQ. Our technical advisors can work with your business to check compliance or work to reduce your waste. Remember, technical assistance is non-regulatory, meaning we work with you to fix problems instead of issuing fines. DEQ has provided checklists for large and small quantity generating facilities. Put on your inspector hat and assess how your facility is doing. Make this a regular practice to ensure ongoing compliance. You can access these checklists and all other forms on DEQ Hazardous Waste Management Guidance website. Thank you for joining Oregon DEQ's RCRA Basics training. Visit our website to connect with your local technical assistance specialist, explore more about hazardous waste rules, and access helpful tools.